Volume 7 C7. She squinted under the sun. Is it supposed to hurt like this? The half-elf asked and hopped into the carriage. She took one look at Raymond's obviously painless expression and frowned a little bit. No, it isn't, is it? I really should get out more. There's nothing out here worth seeing, Raymond replied and crossed his arms while glancing out the window of the dark carriage. He drew the curtains shut as she pulled the hood down behind her back. If you say so. But even I get bored hiding away in that treasury as just an extra seat. She crossed her arms and snorted with derision. Raymond crossed the other set of dark curtains and then lightly touched the glowstone next to himself to create light for the two of them. The soft white glow was standard for the treasury, so he asked, is this better? Generally dark, small, enclosed, with nothing but something old to look at? I don't know about better, but it is normal. She winked at him and brushed the dark side of her hair back a little. I'm about 1/3 your age. Raymond pointed out with a bemused little smirk, so unless I'm holding up a mirror that you're looking into. HMPF, age is relative. I'm a half-elf, she said, in our terms, I'm barely a middling teenager, meanwhile you're ancient. Ouch. Raymond pretended to wince, then spread his arms on the back of the high seat of the carriage. So, games aside, here's what lies ahead. It will take us most of a month to get there, so we're going to stop as little as possible. I'm going to take care of everything on the way. You're the one doing us the favor after all. So why should you have to do anything but that? He asked rhetorically and as reasonably as he could. That sounds fair. She answered with an agreeable nod. So would that make you my servant, old man? She winked, and to her surprise, Raymond actually nodded. If that's how you'd like to think of it. I'll take care of everything. You can just wait in here or in our rooms along the way. We'll camp between cities and towns, and if you need or want anything along the way, just let me know and I'll make sure we get it. Raymond replied, then he leaned forward and rested his forearms on his knees. The sunlight will take a lot of time to get used to for you, and we don't want you struggling, so you do need to spend some time outside, get used to the environment. I've been to our winter and to the arena. It's a big city, and a big arena. Both are vastly larger than Kamimiyako. There's also a lot of people who are scammers, hucksters, frauds. Okay, I realize that you're using words, but what are those? She asked, pursing her lips together in a little frown. Like thieves, but they steal from you in different ways. They use cleverness and cunning to trick you into handing over your money, and they're all over the place. I have more experience with those and how to spot them, so. Raymond coughed, cleared his throat and straightened up. Just let me deal with everyone we have to interact with along the way. Fine. She shrugged and looked toward the window as if she could see out of it. She couldn't, the curtains were far too thick and far too dark, but her ears caught the noise of voices. People were up and about in earnest, but her ears caught every word. She reached up and touched them. My father's ears. She cursed the sense of hearing she got from him. A part I got from my mother's rapist. She drew her hand away, took her hair and moved it to cover her ears again. Most people won't be that interesting anyway, if cardinals are any example. She chuckled at her own joke, and Raymond laughed along with her. I guess we can be a little stodgy sometimes. Especially lately. Raymond acknowledged when his laughter faded away. Not that I blame the others, we've been losing influence since the signs appeared. Now there are 2 demi-human friendly countries and we're practically surrounded, and it looks like the Draconic Kingdom will be added to that list if they keep slipping into the Allfather's sphere of influence. He sighed and rubbed his temple. It gives me a headache though. How's that? You're not dying on me now, are you? She asked. She wore a smile on her face when she asked, but also leaned forward a little when she said it. No more than any normal human. Raymond answered with a shake of his head. No, it's the others, he said as the carriage finally began to roll forward and leave the city after it rocked a little with the carriage driver climbing up into place outside. I'm as worried as they are, but some of them are just about frothing at the mouth over this issue. Dominic wanted to launch a crusade against Team Albion. But we haven't even finished. Raymond briefly closed his lips, finished with the war in the south, yet. I know. Hopefully my father lives long enough for me to get to face him in the arena, where I can end his life for good. She's jaw clenched and for several seconds, neither said anything. Perhaps eager for an end to the silence, She was the one to break it. So when he proposed invading Demalbian, what did you say? How do you know it was me? Raymond asked, blinking back his surprise at her guess. Because you're practical. Nobody would want to fight two wars at once. Even I know that much, Zess, she said with smug confidence, and sat with her back straight, fairly daring him to say she was wrong. He didn't. I asked him what army he planned on using in Demalbian. He sputtered for a few minutes and said we should just use you and the scriptures, then fight a holding action against your father, Raymond said, and cringed in his soul. I can't tell her what he really said. I can't tell her he said, use the half-breed spawn with the scriptures. Raymond tensed his jaw and fought back the wave of anger that rose again when he remembered those words spoken against his Zeshi. Zeshi's lips tightened the same as Raymond's did, and she narrowed her eyes. If that had happened, I would have refused to go. I'm patient because I have time to be. But I won't be put on hold for every little problem. Having me nearly killed my mother, and raising me nearly destroyed her. The least I can do is avenge her. I won't play second fiddle to politics over every upstart demi-human with a little bit of power. And here I thought you wanted strong opponents. Raymond remarked more evenly, glad for a semi-shift of subject. Not if I can't have a child with them. The Demalbian ruler is a woman. Zess, she snorted and crossed her arms. I know I'm a little sheltered, but even I know better than to hold out hopes of a child that way. Raymond didn't bother to suppress his shudder. You're like a daughter to me, please do not put that image in my head. Zess, she smirked, just a little bit. Just 3 minutes ago you pointed out that I was older than you. Pick a seat, old man. They shared a laugh that filled the carriage, and onward it continued to roll. Brain walked the road with a smile on his face and a spring in his step. The road east was a good one, and whether he cared much for them or not, the slain theocracy knew how to provide security for their territory. The journey to Winter would have proven impossible at his current pace, at least in the time he had before the tournament. However, the swordsman had no intention of missing out on the chance of a lifetime, so each night while it was cool, he ran out a sprint that put horses to shame, slept for several hours before dawn, then walked while he ate and drank. He took another bite out of a hunk of bread held in his left hand. The warmth of the day was such that he couldn't bring himself to hurry. It didn't bother him at all when the carriage raced past. There was no reason to rush, not until nightfall at least. Boredom wasn't really a problem for the swordsman. After all, the prosperous human kingdom had an abundance of travelers on the road. There was always a merchant to chit-chat with, or a young man or woman setting out to make a name for themselves in the world. At high noon he found himself intersecting a young man with a cheap long sword at his side and a young woman in the robes of a martial artist. She had a tabard over her head that hung down her front and sharp blue eyes full of pride and confidence. Her dark hair was bound in a ponytail behind her head, and the young man occasionally tugged it playfully. The young man, for his part, had short brown hair and wore no armor except for a breastplate over his dark blue shirt. At least that red headband on his head will keep the sweat out of his eyes. Brain thought and tried not to mock the pair on sight. Exactly what they were was obvious to the former bandit. Village friends off on an adventure, ready to change the world. But probably die on their first assignment. He felt a range of emotions then, looking at the pair. His own departure from his village, the enthusiasm to rise to the top, a kind of innocence he held onto for far longer than most because he was not confronted with loss or defeat for so long. But his heart panged for them as well, as most such people died before they even got their first adventure, and most of those who didn't survive the adventure itself. Brain liked the pair immediately, so when they came near and saw his single sword, conversation was inevitable. Off an adventure? The young man asked while he looked Brain up and down, sizing him up. No, I just walk up and down the road holding this sword all day every day, Brain said with a little smug look down at the warrior. The young monk, or so he assumed her to be, broke out in a laugh at the sarcastic answer, but rather than let it continue too long, Brain chose to answer them seriously. I'm actually on my way to Winter to fight in the tournament. I've had a lot of adventures, but this is the one where I'm hoping for a real challenge. As for you two, Brain looked them both up and down. I'm guessing you're novice adventurers? Yep. My name is the warrior jabbed his thumb against his breastplate and started to speak, but cut off when Brain held up a hand with palm facing the young warrior and shook his head. Nope, no names, not in this business. Chances are we'll never meet again, and if we remember anything, it'll be what we are. So I'll just call you warrior, Brain said and pointed to the young man, and then to the young woman and said, I'll call you fighter, and you can just call me the greatest swordsman in the world. How's that sound? The pair sputtered and tried to speak for several seconds, but after trading the sort of glance at one another in a silent conversation which was only possible through lifelong friends, they shrugged it off and nodded. So, you're really good? Warrior asked, and Brain could only smirk. I've tested myself from Reistais to Demalbian, and I've only lost one fight in all my life. I'm not sure if I'm at the peak now or not, but that is what I really want to know, so it's off to the tournament. Wow, Fighter said and clapped her hands together. Maybe you could give a few lessons to my friend here. She put a hand on Warrior's shoulder. We're heading toward the northern part of the theocracy. There are goblin slaying quests up there that should make great practice before we try for the really hard adventures. Goblins, huh? Brain nodded. I suppose I could show your friend a few things. They may not look like much, especially the wild ones, but a sword in the gut from a goblin hand will kill you as easily as a sword from me. Don't ever go in cocky. Demi-humans, even the lower intelligence ones, haven't survived this long in human lands without reason. I guess, but they are just goblins, Warrior said and tapped his sword. I've chased them off before. Famous last words. Brain remarked, but if you want, I'll teach you a bit when we stop at the next resting grove. I'll be leaving you tonight though. Resting groves are at all the major intersections, right? That's what my dad said, and he used to be an adventurer. Warrior replied with a question and looked down the long road, squinting his eyes in the hopes of finding such a grove was close. More or less, every now and then there's one without it, but the fruit trees are so easy to grow and so abundant that you can expect to find them at nearly every one. Brain explained, just remember the traveler's code and don't take more than you need right then. You'll be badly punished if they catch you pilfering. Conversation flowed like that for a few hours until they found just such a grove. Two roads intersected, one curving its way towards some distant northern hills, while the other continued onward. A cluster of trees sat at each intersecting corner of the road, thin things, no bigger around than Brain's own waist, but tall as an ogre. The branches spread out to create abundant shade, though they were bowed with the weight of various fruits. Apples, pears, and more. All right, warrior, show me what you've got, Brain said and took up position in a clearing among the trees. As the young swordsman charged across the distance, Brain swept his sword out, cut an apple from the branch, and began to fend off the young man while crunching on the sweet golden fruit. Warrior let out a fearsome battle cry that was not at all fearsome to the veteran, and Brain continued to munch as the wild swings came on. He's an undisciplined young man, but there's potential. Brain thought as he batted aside another wild swing while Fighter simply sat beneath the shade and watched. After several minutes, Brain targeted and led the boy toward a tree. And a wild swing buried the edge into the trunk. As Warrior struggled to pull it free, Brain thrust at the young man's fingers, jabbed at the thumb, and the sword fell from the young man's grip and thudded into the grass. Boy, any opponent fiercer than time is too much for you to be confident about killing. Brain remarked. The apple wasn't even down to the core, so he crunched another bite, chewed, and swallowed. Warrior fell to his knees, sweating, breathing hard, and looking down at the blade on the grass with utter disappointment. Let me give you a few pointers, Brain suggested. Your instinct is good, you want to be on the attack, but if there'd been more than one, even if the other was half as good as I, you'd be dead. You were too obvious, and you didn't use the environment. The best thing you both can do? Stop at the city nearest to where you want to go, trade labor for some lessons from some of the retired warriors who live there, and then in a year or 3, go out and face off against goblins. But I don't want to wait, Warrior mumbled. Maybe not, but the dead wait forever. Trade some time for success, both of you. Monsters may kill you both, but they may also do a lot worse before that, so go when you're ready or die when you get there, Brain said and took a few quick bites of the apple before tossing the core just outside of the grove. That brought silence to his short-term companions, and while they mulled that over, Brain looked off in the distance and watched the sun begin to set. All right, warrior, fighter, good luck, Brain remarked, and if you hear of a new emperor in Baharuth with a handsome face and blue hair, come and see me after your first success. He waited for no answer from the two, he only sheathed his blade, and took off at a run, leaving the pair to whatever fate they found for themselves. Volume 7 C8. Cerebrate reclined in his seat in the carriage and watched the little girl half run, half stagger away, her tears running down her naked body until they fell off her bare skin and into the grass. That wasn't the only fluid to run over her skin, but as he lay back, satisfied and at ease, he couldn't find a reason to care one way or the other. His only regret. I wish I had more cocks. Enough to do that to every little piece of candy in this whole rotten kingdom. That thought disrupted his happiness a little and he reached down to stroke himself. There'll be another village tonight, and then another, all the way to our winter. That eased his rising ill temper a little bit. The promise of so many sweets along the way almost made up for the complete loss of work. When I win the throne and I'm the emperor, I'll have a fresh one with every meal. His tongue lolled out of his mouth as he filled his head with fantasies and approached his peak of pleasure. But the truth beneath that pleasure was that a sea of bitterness roiled without end. That bitch. Fired without so much as a thank you. I was supposed to get the queen for myself. A night with a royal slut child. I was so close. He finished, and wiped his hand on the clothing the village girl left behind before running back to her family. There was always a villager with a child to trade for a few hours, and that ensured no trouble followed his amusements. But nothing completely burned away the hatred he felt for the kingdom he would be passing through soon. Kingdom of Nazarick. He cursed the name and glared out the window of his carriage. The warrior teams they provided were second to none, and rendered him redundant. Whoever imagined an adamantite-ranked adventurer could be made needless? He wanted to howl in his frustration. Without even lust to distract him, he reached for the bottle and began to swig down what was left of the wine. But that same resentment brought up a sense of caution about his earlier thoughts. Maybe it wouldn't be wise to try to buy one there. I'll be passing through the kingdom of Carney. They're not officially part of the kingdom of Nazarick yet. Better safe than sorry. Cerebrate thought, and drank the last of the bottle. Bitter that he reached the bottom without passing out, he ran his fingers through the scraggly brown beard and licked his fingers to savor just one more drop, before he closed his eyes and tried unsuccessfully to sleep. Ines pressed his lips to those of the sleeping succubus and watched her eyes flutter open. This was one of their favorite games. She wrapped her arms around his body, and then her wings as well, and drew him closer. "When do we leave, my love?" Albedo asked as he moved entirely on top of her. Her golden eyes took every inch that they could. "Not for a while. I'd like to take a carriage rather than a gate, so we will go sooner than we otherwise would, though," Ines answered and breathed in her heady scent. "A carriage?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. For at least a moment that curiosity pushed aside her desires. "Yes. In the first world, travel was not something most of us did. We each had our own realms, and came to the second world to meet and explore a new place and create. Now here in the third world? I'd like to take my time and see everything. There is no hurry, is there?" he asked and placed a hand over her belly, leaving the question unspoken. "No. None. But if we're taking a carriage, then there is something I'd like to ask," Albedo said, and delayed his question by pulling herself up to plant a kiss of her own on his lips and duel with this tongue for several seconds before she lay back again and licked her lips to enjoy his lingering flavor. "I'd like to ask that you bring Calco here, into the heart of Nazarick to show off your son," Albedo said with a cocky little smile. "Are you serious?" Ines asked. He froze suddenly and shifted to lie beside her on the bed, games and desire briefly forgotten. "Yes, there's a ritual of the Roble Holy Kingdom she will have to undergo, and there is no place better for it than here." Albedo replied, "I'm sure you already know all about it, but I'm certain she's anxious. I think that is part of why she sent that letter informing you of her intent to travel with the Queen of Frost. She knows of your love for me, and fears for the fate of her son after I sent out the announcement of my pregnancy." "Poor little human," Albedo laughed, "so naive." "A ritual?" Ines thought and racked his brain. His anxiety hit him like an old-world train. His immediate instinct was to nod along, and his head even started to move. As did his lips, prepared to lie and pretend he knew what she was talking about. But he stopped himself. "No," he told himself, "I did so much harm to my children, pretending and lying. And I wounded Albedo the most." That old grief washed over his soul for a moment and carried away his intent at pretense. When it was gone, he answered her. "What ritual is this?" Ainz asked, and Albedo rolled on top of him. Silly me, Albedo tittered out, of course a supreme being wouldn't trouble their minds with the rituals of lesser creatures. It's the Patanicius Declaratus, where Aurelian's life or death will be decided. Ordinarily this would be a perfunctory thing, but I think she fears the outcome since I am now carrying an heir to you as well. It was several minutes before Ainz could say anything at all to that, as he could not bring himself to break the kiss he gave to her next. The Queen of Frost chose a scenic route over which to guide her counterpart, and their carriages rolled on uninterrupted for long stretches of time, pausing only to relieve themselves, eat, or sleep. And when they slept, Naya insisted on providing the best hospitality they could manage. It was under these conditions that Queen Kalka followed Queen Baraha into the heart of a full-blown demi-human town. "This isn't Hobans," Naya said by way of apology, flashing fierce fangs in as friendly a smile as she could. "We're still growing here, only my capital city is really established. Everything else is just towns and villages, like this place." She waved her hand around the mix of stone and wooden buildings. Curiously, unlike human construction which tended to square off, the buildings in towns were single-story and focused on length rather than height. They were long oval shapes over which wood, metal, or even occasionally stone rooftops went. "I see," Kalka said and rocked her son in her arms. He laughed a little bit, heedless it seemed, of the pounding in his mother's heart. Demi-humans of all types occupied the town, from orcs to Xian to ones that Kalka couldn't have named if her life depended on it. Four-armed creatures with straight, slender bodies which seemed almost totally faceless but somehow knew where they were going. Every part of her body cried out in fear of retribution. The reflexive fear of demi-humans and the violence they might do to her or her child was a part of her character. Her host, however, seemed oblivious, and that made Kalka's sense of shame all the worse. Her companions were tense, but none had sweat on her brow that the queen could see. It was then seeing a human that caught Kalka most off guard. "Humans?" she asked without thinking. Naya turned around to face Kalka. "Oh, yes, I should have mentioned that. Forgive me, royal sister." Naya bowed her head. "I assumed you knew that a number of humans chose to remain behind. I was offering free land to anyone willing to work it for 5 years, and made that same offer to all my prisoners of war. Most of them went home, but some, a few thousand at least, chose to remain behind." Kalka was quiet as she followed the Frost Queen to a large wooden door. "They're full citizens, of course," Naya added hastily. "I put them all under the Astraka house for their greater ease, but there's just so much land that a few like that one," she waved her hand toward the direction the human vanished into, "go off on their own. Some stake claims and mine, some farm, but they're all my people. As long as they obey my laws, they're mine." Kalka thought that over, and her own emotional response to it. "I see." She repeated herself and followed the Frost Queen into the building. It turned out to be larger than anticipated, though save for the slug-like creature behind a counter, it seemed like any other town inn. Wooden floor, a bar at which several different demi-humans from goblins to elves drank, and a curious-looking dwarf with dark skin and a black beard, drinking and talking. "Room enough for all of us, and my guards," Naya said, and the innkeeper seemed to shiver as if he were excited. "Of course. Did you bring your own dead to eat, or shall we serve you some of our dead, your majesty?" The innkeeper shivered all the faster as he spoke, but his question turned Kalka's face faintly green. Naya looked over her shoulder. "Xian. They have odd dining habits, and odder ways of speaking. There are no people on our menu." The Queen of Frost chuckled, and a collective sigh of relief went up from Kalka, Kellett, and Gustav all at once, as well as their guards, and some of those following Naya. "Venison stew if you don't have any cockatrice," Naya said, "and bed suitable for humanoids." "At your pleasure, your majesty." The Xian innkeeper began to slide away immediately, and while he did, a thought came to Kalka that she did not like at all. "If my reaction to demi-humans is normal, and my husband's kingdom is more welcoming, we'll fall behind, sooner or later. We have to push change like she has. I can't just wait for time to ease things or we'll get a very bad reputation." Kalka rushed from thought to proposal with no time to speak of. "After we return to our homes, Queen Baraha, we should see about moving some demi-humans into my country," Kalka suggested when Naya accepted the key and walked toward the far end of the building. "We should?" Naya asked without a backward glance. Doubt didn't need to be on her face for Kalka to hear it in her voice. "Yes. I'm settling the wildlands now, Or rather, we will be soon. A handful of demi-humans might help ease some of the past tensions between our peoples. Kalka proposed, her steps quickened to put her at Naya's side, and from her side when they reached a far door, she saw a look of doubt in the dragonid eyes. No demi-human has ever lived in your kingdom without being killed for being there, Naya said, and reaching up, she put a hand on Kalka's shoulder. The guards at Kalka's back tensed, but the queen of the Roble Holy Kingdom held up a hand at her side to stop them from responding. Naya noticed both happen and sighed. See? I like you, Queen Besserace, you're the monarch the Holy Kingdom deserves, but you're asking me to put the lives of my people on the line to improve your home's future prospects. I can see no benefit to that for me or for Demalbion's people. If I send a few hundred demi-humans to live in human villages, I'll get back corpses. I'm sorry, sister. But I can't do what you want, Naya said and shoved the key into the iron lock. She twisted it open with a click and then withdrew it to hand to the queen. Sleep well, and we'll travel onward tomorrow, having to go around the lands that will murder me and my escorts will be time-consuming, so we have to start early. But at least the company will be good, Naya said and squeezed Kalka's shoulder gently once, then stepped aside. Sleep well, Queen of Frost, Kalka said, and entered the room with her escort at her back, leaving Naya to go to her own quarters for the night. Volume 7 C9. Out of all the cardinals, she knew and trusted Raymond the most. He'd always dealt straight with her, and in her rare outings in the darkness to remove some threat, he was her constant handler and guide. Whether because of that or in spite of it, he always behaved more gently with her, treating her as if she were the child of a dear friend, and though it grated on occasion, it was hard not to trust a man who showed care like that. Particularly as she lacked any father of her own beyond the one she wanted to murder. So, over the years, she'd come to begrudgingly look up to him in a way. If Dominic told me to stay in the carriage, I'd have told him to drive it up his ass. The half-elf snorted when they rolled up to a village, and then right through it. The next few days passed that way. They camped between villages under the night sky. Curiously enough, they seemed to be taking turns being ahead of a man who ran at night and slept during the day. It was such a regular thing that she ticked off the days by his sweaty smell when he loped past them, and it was a full week before she realized, I'd never been outside this much in my entire life. The stars were twinkling the same as they did each night, a haunch of meat was roasting on a spit over a crackling fire, and the fruit trees at their backs waved gently in the breeze. More notably, a forest loomed close, and it called to her blood like a siren. I've never been this close to it for this long. She set her back against the tree and looked up at the sky. The branches were wide set and offered a clear window to the beyond. Say, Raymond, what are those stars anyway? The stars are stars. How am I supposed to answer that? Raymond chortled while he turned the spit. He glanced up at the sky reflexively when she asked. If I asked you what a half-elf was, how would you answer that? Saying they're born half of rapist animals. She answered, and Raymond's brief laugh died in his throat. She's not really wrong, but not quite the way she thinks. His conscience gnawed at him. There were a lot more half-elves from human violence than the other way around, a secret that was kept from her for her entire life. I could tell her, but how would she respond to that? There was no good answer, and so he kept turning the spit and held his tongue. The smell of the meat was flavorful and rich. He held a hand up over it and tilted a little container of salt over the cooking flesh. But seriously, I'm asking what they're made of. Are they diamonds? She asked. No. The god's wisdom told us that they're actually giant balls of gas, each one bigger than the whole world many times over, burning billions of miles away. Supposedly, many of them actually died a long time ago, but their light is only just now reaching us. Raymond explained and she whistled appreciatively. Sounds like a folk story or something, she said, but a neat one. It sounds like total bullshit. A blue-haired man said as he approached, veering off of the road. She sniffed the air. You're the man who's been running past us over the last few days, aren't you? Given that you just took a whiff, I'd say that means it's been too long since I've bathed. The blue-haired man laughed with a self-deprecating look, lifted his arm, and sniffed. He pretended to wince. Yeah, too long. You don't have to have good senses to know that much, Raymond said, his hand quietly slipping within his cardinal robes to palm a dagger. What do you want? Nothing really. My name is Brain, and I couldn't help but smell the food. Again, and he put one hand on his stomach. It growled at them like a feral beast, and Raymond relaxed. I was hoping I could ask for a bite. Traveler's hospitality and all that. An unwritten rule of the road, to help travelers in distress, feed the hungry traveler, was a commandment that even demi-humans were said to have embraced. It didn't hurt that travelers were always armed, and the best way to keep a sword sheathed when a hungry belly was present was to put bread in one hand and cheese in the other, or so it was said. Sit. Share the fire, Raymond said, and when the blue-haired man set his sword down on a log and sat, the cardinal took his hand off his knife. Thank you, Brain said, and took a seat. My name is Brain Unglaeus. I've heard of you, Raymond said immediately, but aren't you from Riestais? What are you doing here? Oh, I'm on my way to our winter. I was in Demalbion's capital city when word came of the tournament, and it's a bit of a run for me to get there in time. Brain tossed off the sentence like it was nothing. Both Raymond and Zeshi stiffened when he said it. Raymond, however, was in the middle of handing over a chunk of cheese, and such was his surprise that he dropped it. Brain darted his hand out and caught the chunk before it could hit the grass. Hey, thanks, but try not to drop it in the grass. He smirked a little, only the smallest upturn in his lip exposed it in the light of the fire, and he brought the cheese up to his mouth to take a bite. It fairly melted in his mouth with a savory tartness that slid over his tongue with the smoothness of water going downhill. Demalbion? You are with the demi-humans? Zeshi asked with sudden curiosity. You're not serious? Raymond demanded. He'd stopped turning the spit when Brain spoke. Yeah, sure, Brain said and casually chewed on the tart yellow chunk. I'm a free sword with no master, I go where I want, and Demalbion is friendly to travelers who want to show their talent. Their queen is utterly mad for talent. She said anyone who comes to her domain offering to use their talents in peace can expect to be rewarded as handsomely as they would be in the kingdom of Nazarick or better. There's a bit of a rivalry between those two, it seems like. I'd go to the kingdom of Nazarick, but I still have some history in some of those areas that I'm not quite sure is settled. So I went west. That's a lot of walking, Zeshi remarked. Brain shrugged while Raymond frowned. Maybe, though, old man, you might want to start turning that spit again. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth or anything, but you two probably don't like burnt meat any more than I do. Shit. Raymond cursed and resumed rotating the spit when he saw the char forming on the section of meat closest to the flames. You're welcome. But yeah, I've spent my whole life traveling. I've been to the Elf Kingdom, to the Draconic Kingdom, to Riestais, Baharuth, the Roblé Holy Kingdom. No home means nothing to tie me down. All I've ever done is test my sword, Brain said and slid off the log to rest his back against it instead. To Zeshi, who had never traveled at all, Brain was like some strange, unfamiliar creature. She looked at him with utter fascination. I went to Demalbion to fight for prizes in their arena. It isn't much, but they're building a lot, and I thought it might be neat for the first arena champion to be a human traveler instead of a native of the region. Plus I was just curious about what it was like there. I go where I want, and nobody can tell me otherwise. It's a nice life. Brain remarked and stretched out his legs. So why go to Baharuth? The life of an emperor doesn't sound like it would appeal to you. Raymond asked. The man was so outgoing and gregarious that it was hard not to like his rakish easy manner, and against his will, the cardinal was curious. Nah, it doesn't. I figure I'll win the tournament and just hand it over to whoever came in second. I'll settle for a token payment of gold coins to wherever I am next. The throne doesn't suit me. I'll probably just pay off a bounty on me in Riestais, if there is still one, or the kingdom of Carni, if it's there instead, and then go back to Demalbion. Demalbion, not the theocracy or the Holy Kingdom? Not a human nation? Don't you have some loyalty to humanity in you? Raymond's religious instincts took over for a moment, but Brain only laughed. You're a religious man all right, but no, not really. Listen, old-timer, I've been all over the place. I've had goblins, elves, dark elves, humans, orcs, and you name it, host me, fight me, and work for me. And let me tell you this. The average person of every one of those races is a coward. Not 1 in 20 wants to pick up a sword and die. But I've seen strong ones who are brave because they're strong, and weak ones who are brave because they have something to fight for. From where I'm sitting, they're all bad and all good in the same ways. Just different flesh from one to the next. Like whatever human male raped her mother to make her, he inclined his head towards Eshi and gave her an apologetic bow of his head. "No offense," he added, then finished. "I've got no real reason to favor my own kind over any other. There's only two sides where I stand, the ones who'd help out, and the ones who'd shove a knife in my back over a pair of boots." It was a rant if ever there was one, and Raymond didn't much care for it. He sliced off some meat and handed it to the blue-haired swordsman. "Here. That should be enough to hold you, and not to sound inhospitable, but I think you'd best run. I'm not in a sociable mood all of a sudden." "Yeah, fine, old man. No offense meant, just how things are, you know," Brain said. "Thanks for the meat and the cheese," he said, taking a strip of roast meat. He wolfed it down, snatched up his sheath, and bowed to his hosts. A moment later, he was running again and was quickly out of sight. It wasn't until he was gone that Zeshi said a thing, with far better eyes than Raymond, keeping her eye on the retreating dot in the darkness far longer than the Cardinal did, and she was still watching him vanish while she asked, "Raymond, why did he assume that it was my mother who was an elf?" "Shit." Raymond mentally cursed, and dropped his knife into the dirt at his feet when his fingers fumbled after her question. Volume 7 C10. The carriages of the queens rolled through the winding roads of Riestais, and little by little, as the guards blended together in their rotations of securing each other's charges, the two groups began to grow more comfortable with one another. "They're coming along nicely, aren't they?" the Queen of Frost asked while she cradled the infant son of the Holy Queen of Roble and the All-Father of Nazarick. She tapped his nose with the tip of her taloned hand and drew a giggle from the boy. His hands closed around the rounded part of her talon and tugged. Her hand moved with his pull. "And your son has quite a grip," Naya added, drawing her finger away to avoid accidentally harming him. "They are, and he does." The Holy Queen gave a radiant smile to her counterpart. "Your suggestion of drinking contests between the two groups and breaking up the rivalry with duels. It was a good one." "Thank you," Naya replied and held the swaddled infant back to her opposite number. Kalka accepted him into her arms with the greatest care, and asked, "Is that how you united the demi-humans?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" Naya gave a fangy smile at the Queen as if she were holding some closely guarded secret. "Yes, actually," Kalka said matter-of-factly and glanced over to the circle of soldiers where a bare-chested orc and an equally bare-chested paladin rolled around amidst the cheers of their comrades. "Okay, sure," Naya said with a rough laugh, "that was part of it. Demi-humans aren't all that different, they just live harder lives. A strong individual may gather a lot of followers, but there are lots of strong individuals. If one treats you like dirt, go to another who behaves better. So even the worst of them have limits unless they want to rule a kingdom of one. I used my reputation and knowledge to win more than duels. I won battles, then offered the losers a future and integrated them into my army. Plus, we had a common enemy." She gave a long, lingering, though wrathless look to the Holy Queen. "That makes sense. So now that all that is over?" the Queen asked. "Now we build up. Things have already changed. Malbion is getting stronger all the time. New mining operations are just the tip of the mountain. Thanks to the dark dwarves we've hired, we'll be building up our artisan class for years to come. No more need to steal and pillage to gain wealth. We'll create it ourselves." Demi-human merchants wandering through the Holy Kingdom. Kalka remarked, "If somebody had said something about that 5 years ago I wouldn't have believed it. We barely believed they had merchants at all." Naya nodded. "I thought the same way, but they did have a very small merchant class, but it was never secure enough to thrive. With your permission, Your Majesty, I'd like to make formal contact with your most important merchant. Tynamok, I think, was his name. I want to formally integrate our merchants into the International Guild and he seems like just the man to go to for it." The cheers went up and the two queens paused to glance at the source of the noise. The human was over the orc and was steadily bringing fists down against the orc's big snout. "We can arrange for a meeting, but it will have to be in Hobans, and you'll have to bring along some of your merchants, plus you'll need to have a few humans among them." The Queen made the offer, and faster than she expected, the dragonette who sat across from her on the log, gave a sharp nod. "I expected terms like that. We'll bring samples of some of our finished goods too, and perhaps you should invite your husband. After all, he will effectively be ruling most of the places we expect to trade with. Plus I'd be lying if I were to say I wasn't hoping to meet him again. A human eager for the unity of all kinds." It's almost unthinkable. If things had gone differently, Naya sighed, I might have headed for his kingdom on my own just as a nameless squire. He's proven persuasive in that regard. Kalka acknowledged, decidedly overlooking her own past point of view, though it hasn't hurt that he's got magic power nobody has seen in centuries. The priests in my country are wondering if he's a player. You mean a full-blown god? I'm not surprised. Naya answered, he may very well be. Don't tell the theocracy that, you know how they think of these things, they're so dogmatically entrenched that even the word of a god might not change their minds. Kalka snorted and then began to coo to her infant as his breathing settled into a sleeping rhythm. I know. And sooner or later, we'll trade words about that. Hopefully that is all we'll trade, but only time will tell. Naya answered, and when the smell of rich stew reached the seated royals, she crudely licked her lips. Enough serious talk for now though, shall we eat? Yes. Yes, let's. The Queen of the Roble Holy Kingdom answered as the bowls were brought over and a cheer went up. A bloody and bruised orc stood with his fist raised high in victory while the paladin huffed and puffed as he was helped up by his friends. Elves are so gross, Cerebrate muttered as the little one lay curled up holding the place where he'd used his favorite weapon on her. This one was only a half-breed, but still, she had those ears. The body stays young at least, nice, fine bones, but their faces tend to have that angular look, and the ears are ugly and wiggle when they're scared, like fucking deer looking for danger. Part of Cerebrate resented the coin he'd spent on her and regretted what it would mean for his travels. After I leave the theocracy, I'll have to take side roads to avoid suspicion, maybe dispose of her part of the way there. That was another upside to his purchase. If he used it up, it would mean less to him to get rid of it. He took a bite of his stew. Venison, deer were plentiful, and the meat had a rich, succulent flavor. But still, the lack of spices was a problem. He frowned down at the bowl. Since the Kingdom of Nazarik's policies, trade has slowed down a lot. The last 3 places didn't even have salt to spare. Meat without spices was still meat, but while he looked down at the cheap wooden bowl of broth, meat, potato chunks, and a few other ingredients, he couldn't help but find it bland. Owie. It hurts. Why won't the bleeding stop? The half-elf girl whimpered, more to herself than to him. Her golden hair was a tangled mess now after her brief, futile struggle before she became a limp, groaning doll, which in turn became a weeping lump of sweaty, dirty flesh. That's it. Cerebrate snapped his fingers and the little frown on his face turned upside down. Slut girl, get over here, and be quick about it. He snapped his fingers again and pointed to his feet. He saw the way her dull eyes sharpened and widened with fear, and she got to wobbly feet with the greatest difficulty and slowness, and walked with pain-filled, shaking steps, her legs kept apart to avoid more pain between them until she all but collapsed in front of him. Master? She asked. Cerebrate held the bowl under her chin right high. Cry into this, I need salt. The callous indifference was worse than cruelty, and she quietly began sobbing again, tears running over the rim of the wooden bowl, until he drew it back from her, stirred, and took a bite. A little too much salt, he thought as he put the wooden spoon into his mouth and glanced at the kneeling half-breed. What? Go clean yourself, you stink, he said and pointed toward a river just a little off to the side of the road where Cerebrate's makeshift camp sat. I smell like you. She accused him and looked up at him with bitter, hate-filled eyes. Bitch, he snapped, and the fist of the night connected with her face. She howled in pain as she was snapped backward and sent flying, crashing and bouncing over the dirt and grass. My eye. My eye. My eye. She whimpered as she clutched at the injury. Just clean yourself up, it's a long journey ahead and you're not getting back in my carriage while you stink, Cerebrate hissed. A few yards away, the carriage driver, a human of the theocracy, watched the scene with a mix of disinterest, curiosity, and disgust. Cerebrate didn't think anything of the servant, neither loved nor loathed. As long as he drove, it was fine. Even if he says anything he shouldn't in some other country, so what? There'll be no proof to be had. Content with this reasoning, Cerebrate ate his meal in peace while the weeping girl kept saying, my eye, and staggered out of view and toward the river. Layali clutched her injury as she staggered away from the monster. When she moved her hand aside, she felt her eye come with it. Being only 67, she was still a child, but she'd seen enough injuries to know what this meant. My eye is taken out of its socket. It's bad. Real bad. And the rest. The abuse of her kind was nothing new, but until this one, nobody had shown any interest in her that way. But that's all this one wants. There's nowhere I can go. No parents. Nobody will help me. This is a nightmare. I'm living in a nightmare. Why? For what? She whimpered quietly as she sank her body into the river. Clean, I have to get clean. Wash him off, wash him out, I have to get clean. She grabbed a handful of sand from the embankment and began to use it to scrub the blood and dirt from everywhere on her body. Layali sank deeper into the water. She scrunched her toes into the soft ground as the cool waters rushed around her and raced away. The one good part of traveling with the monster who called himself Cerebrate was that she could see the long horizons. The world is so much bigger than I thought. So much bigger. The water was up to her nose. One hand clung to the agony-filled eye socket while the other struggled to clean herself off. Minute after minute until an hour passed and her flesh was raw and red and the scrapes of the raw scrubbing grew worse and worse. I'm still not clean. I'll never be clean. Layali whimpered and blew bubbles in the water as she screamed into it when that realization hit. Her good eye darted around, searching for somewhere, anywhere, but intuitively she knew the truth. There's nowhere to run. Got nothing, nowhere. No one. She recalled briefly the day her mother passed away, her body buried in the field she toiled over. The elves who worked with her didn't mourn her, and the words of one of the older slaves came back to Layali now as she sat in the cool water of the river, listening to its endless babble as it raced far, far beyond her view. We don't mourn, because her problems are over. Nobody will harm her now. That's the place I can run to. Where even the monster can't follow me. Layali removed her hand from her eye, and it fell dangling down against her cheek, still hanging onto the red retina and dripping blood into the water that was swiftly carried away and disappeared into the current. The half-elf took one more deep breath, lowered her face under the water. It picked up her eye and pulled it to float on the surface of the water to create a bizarre moment when she could see both clearly and a blur both at once in two different directions. The water rushed over her head. She curled up beneath it, dragging the dangling eye down underwater with her, and began to scream once more into the water. Layali's screaming went on until the bubbles stopped, and she didn't feel the water beginning to carry her away.